The really important thing to understand here is we cannot just pull away a coping strategy, like stop doing that addictive behavior, or stop overworking, or slow down, or stop binge eating, or stop doing drugs, or whatever. You cannot just stop. Why? Because remember, what's underneath it is the dysregulation. So our work is instead, we have to replace the coping strategy with a regulating resource. In time, that underlying activation resolves fully. And guess what? You no longer need anything to cope. Now I can actually experience these things like TV or a glass of wine or exercise, not from a place of this is controlling me, but instead I am in the driver's seat.
Welcome to You Make Sense. This podcast is a manual to understanding your human experience so that you can navigate the world with freedom, ease, empowerment, and create the life that you desire. Remember, you make sense. All parts, always.
So in this episode, we're going to talk about coping strategies and why we numb. Do you ever find yourself being in a moment where maybe you feel stressed out or overwhelmed and you turn to your phone and you start scrolling and all of a sudden 20 minutes go by? That is a coping strategy. Or maybe you find yourself having a third glass of wine when you really didn't want to have any wine at all. Or perhaps you notice that after the end of a long day, you come home and there's no longer busyness happening, and all of a sudden you find yourself in the kitchen eating even though you're not hungry. Or maybe you find yourself online shopping when you don't really need to buy anything. All of those things are coping strategies. Now, what is that, or why do we do it? A coping strategy is a brilliant self-protective response that supports us to disconnect from the emotion, the experience, the dysregulation that we are currently having in our bodies. Why would we want to do that? Well, if no one taught us what to do with the anxiety, the pain, the fear, the terror, the rage, the depression, the hopelessness, the grief, the sadness, the sorrow, if no one taught us how to successfully discharge that from our bodies, which means to allow that to move through ourselves and then feel differently, if we didn't learn how to do that, the only options are to be with that perpetual dysregulation and the feelings and the sensations involved with it, or to find a way to disconnect from it. And so coping strategies are exactly that. They're adaptive things we've found along the way that support us to disconnect from the dysregulation or the experience happening in our bodies. I just want to give a caveat and say that a lot of times in therapeutic work, a coping strategy is referred to as something that helps to move the activation through our bodies. In my work, I call that a regulating resource. So regulating resources, which we'll talk about in a bit, move the activation out of our bodies, and coping strategies numb it or help us disconnect from it. And there can be a lot of shame about the ways that we learn to cope. I've used so many things to cope in my life, it's not even funny. Most of the things that you think of are things that I used. I used exercise to cope. I used drinking to cope. I used working all the time to cope, like never slowing down. I used food to cope, and so many other things too. And what we can tend to do is we exacerbate the pain that's already there in our dysregulation by shaming ourselves for them. And what we know about shame is it feeds on silence. So a lot of the times we keep the things that we use to cope secret. And internally, we then beat ourselves up over using them, all the while not knowing why we're using them. And also, by the way, feeling like, and you may notice this, like something takes over the steering wheel inside of you, and all of a sudden you're doing this thing that you don't really want to be doing, but you can't seem to stop yourself from doing it. An example of that for myself, when I used to use food to binge. Food was a way to disconnect from my feelings, especially at night, would use food to numb. Why? Because in my childhood experience, nighttime meant experiencing a lot of abuse, and also nighttime meant I had to slow down enough as an adult to be with what was there, like loneliness and grief and all of that. So instead, I would use food to numb. And even though I wasn't hungry, I would tell myself, I'm not going to do this again. I would find myself in the kitchen eating something that I didn't really want to eat and not being able to stop. And then I would stop having food in the house, and I would literally drive myself to a store in pajamas to get a bag of potato chips, and then shame myself of like, why am I doing this? Or the same with using drinking to cope, or the same with using exercise. Our systems will go to the ends of the earth to use these coping strategies if we don't do something with the activation that's actually inside. And I also want to say this, that our culture tends to do something that's really unfortunate. We celebrate certain coping strategies and we shame people for other coping strategies. For example, here's one that I used all the time, which is being a workaholic. That's a coping strategy. It gives you a sense of control, gives you a sense of self-worth when you feel utterly worthless inside, and it also allows you to keep moving so you don't have to be with what's occurring. All of those are ways that we cope with the dysregulation or the unresolved stuff living inside of us. So we celebrate being a workaholic, right? Like, wow, look at all this success. But if you don't have the ability to slow down, that is not coming from health. It's coming from a place of coping. So we celebrate something like that. We also can tend to celebrate somebody who controls their eating. And what I mean by that is this can be in a subtle way where I don't allow for any gray area. I only am eating protein and vegetables, and I don't defer from that. And if my friend's having a birthday at an Italian restaurant where there's going to be pizza and pasta, I just don't go because I can't be around that. That lack of flexibility at all is really often an indicator of a coping strategy being present. And that was certainly something I did. So we can tend to celebrate those things, but then we shame ourselves or culture does, for other coping strategies. Actually, I just want to name one more that's celebrated. I say this a lot in programs that I offer, but we can tend to celebrate drinking. One of the way, or normalize it at the very least. I think about this all the time. The idea of happy hour is really a cultural coping strategy, meaning I am stressed all day long in my work or in my parenting or in my life. And when it hits 5, 6, 7 o'clock, I don't have to feel shame about using something to cope, meaning I'm covering up the stress. Instead of discharging it from my body, I'm covering it up with drinking. Now, of course, is there anything wrong with eating healthy? No. Is there anything wrong with loving your work and working really hard? No. Is there anything wrong with having a glass of wine? No. When we're using it to cope, it is simply prolonging our healing. I don't even want to say that there's anything wrong with this because they saved our lives. So we want to celebrate them, including, by the way, the other ways that we might cope, like binge eating, like using drugs. There's no difference between using heroin and being a workaholic. They're both being used to cope, but we shame one. Or using sex to numb. We can tend to shame that too. In a variety of other things, cutting, picking, what would be referred to as self-harm. I don't even like that term because the reason I'm doing it is not because I want to harm myself. The reason I'm doing it is because I want to protect myself from this pain. And other things we do, watching TV, Netflix. You're just scrolling through show after show after show. Why am I doing that? Because I'm avoiding intimacy or problems in my relationship or avoiding being alone. I'm scrolling my phone for hours. All of that, again, are ways that we cope.
Are you enjoying the podcast and want to go even deeper into somatic healing? I have a free live training coming up called Nervous System Starter Kit. In this event, I'm going to equip you with tangible therapeutic tools to harness the power of your nervous system so you can transform your relationships, step towards your purpose, feel better in your body, and so much more. If you can't be there live, there'll be a recording sent to you. Click on the show notes to reserve your seat.
What I'm doing is I'm making a fist with my left hand, okay? Imagine your fist is the dysregulation or active self-protection in your nervous system. A coping strategy comes along and covers it up. So I'm taking my right hand and I'm putting it on top of my left hand like a cover. So it doesn't get rid of that activation. It just covers it. So it prolongs our healing when we continue to use coping strategies because we're never addressing what is underneath. The really important thing to understand here is we cannot just pull away a coping strategy, like stop doing that addictive behavior, or stop overworking, or slow down, or stop binge eating, or stop doing drugs, or whatever. Because remember, what's underneath it is the dysregulation. So our work, which I'm going to get to in a little bit, is instead we have to replace the coping strategy with a regulating resource. A regulating resource is anything that supports our system to learn how to get rid of the dysregulation that is underlying or underneath the coping strategy. When we go through a process of replacing coping strategies with regulating resources, over and over and over again, still allowing ourselves to use that coping strategy, but first leaning into a regulating resource. In time, that underlying activation resolves fully. And guess what? You no longer need anything to cope. So now I can actually experience these things like TV or a glass of wine or exercise, not from a place of this is controlling me, but instead I am in the driver's seat. And that's really, we're going to talk a little bit about how to do that. I have programs that we focus specifically on this. But first, I just want to get to a little bit more understanding around that activation itself. So I want to incorporate parts work into the understanding of coping strategies. I have lots of episodes, I say this a lot, on parts work. Go listen to them. My orientation is using internal family systems as an access point, but in inner child work is simply the same thing. So we all have internal protectors. A protector's job is to ensure that the vulnerable parts of us never feel the pain that they felt in the past. So if I had a vulnerable part that feels terror, or they feel grief, or they feel loneliness, or they feel overwhelm, whatever they experienced when they weren't protected, the overwhelm of that activation, if I have yet to resolve that, that means that that part of me is either perpetually experiencing that, or when they become triggered, they re-experience it. And in their re-experiencing of it, they aren't going to have the tools to process it through our body or their body because they didn't have those tools back then. So essentially, I'm going to experience the same grief I felt 20 years ago, but not have the tools like I didn't then. Or the heartbreak when I was, 5, I'm going to feel it now, but not have the tools to process it through. So what we did was we developed these beautiful protectors whose job is to ensure the vulnerable part doesn't have to feel that. So we have this brilliant threat detector in our nervous system that looks out into the world to see if we're safe. It's called neuroception. So if that threat detector is reminded of something that was dangerous in the past, what happens is it says, oh my gosh, that reminds me of when I was bullied when I was 12. And so all of a sudden, it triggers the 12-year-old vulnerable part of me that was bullied. And I start to feel the same overwhelm and the pain that I felt back then. Immediately what occurs is a protective part responds to the vulnerable part's experience. They feel it. They respond to their affect. And the protector says, what did I do back then to escape this? Let's do that now. Or the protector finds new coping strategies in our adult lives. So the moment that we feel any discomfort or any pain or any loneliness, it might say, go to the kitchen and eat something because that was my only friend as a kid. Or the protector responds and says, go for a run immediately because we need to move, or we need to escape our bodies, or we need to punish our bodies because that's the way that we learn to numb. So the protectors are responding to that younger vulnerable part being triggered. This is why, do you remember at the beginning of the episode where I said it feels like someone's taken over the steering wheel of your body and you're in the kitchen eating a pack of Oreos that you didn't even want to eat and somehow the entire thing's gone? How did that happen? Because you're not in the driver's seat, the protector is. And the protector, if they have to choose between you feeling crappy and bloated and not sleeping well, or the vulnerable part not having to feel that pain, they're going to choose the vulnerable part not having to feel the pain. When we talk about love addiction, for example, what really is that? It's a vulnerable part that so desperately wants to be chosen because they weren't, that they will go to the ends of the earth to be chosen. So instead of that protector allowing the vulnerable part to be and experience the pain they felt in the past, the protector says, I will contort us into anything that we need to be in order for us to be loved. I will sacrifice my life, my purpose, everything else to gain a sense of love because I don't want you to feel unloved again. That's what these brilliant protectors are doing. And if you try to tell the protector, hey, chill out, stop doing this, they could care less about what you say. And they're so uninterested in listening to you. Why? Because they love that vulnerable part too much. So if you try to battle with this protective part, they are always going to win because they are strong, they are resilient, and they are undeterred from their mission of ensuring that vulnerable part is safe. This is why some people say this to me exactly like this. They say, I feel like I'm experiencing an internal battle. You are. The battle you don't realize that you are engaging in is you are fighting against someone who's on your team. This is what we do in terms of our parts. We fight or battle these protective parts as if they are our enemy. They are not our enemy. They are our ally. They have been protecting that vulnerable part of you when no one else did. So what we have to do in order to stop using coping strategies is change the orientation around how we experience and approach our parts. And for anybody listening who has been struggling around any kind of coping strategy that you use, if you're in that struggle, please know it makes so much sense. That means that the internal battle is happening, where you're trying to not do the thing, and the protective part is saying, we must do the thing because I don't want the vulnerable part to be harmed. And then you say, why am I doing this? Or really you're saying, why are you doing this? And the fight goes round and round and round. It's exhausting, and it doesn't lead to what we're wanting. And then we usually shame ourselves and that protective part. We're very unkind to that protective part around what they're doing. So the first is change the internal battle. And that means that you have to see this protector as good. It's very, very important that we do that. Could you imagine if you didn't have that protector? Think of all the things you used to cope in your life. Could you imagine if you didn't have those and instead you had to be with that perpetual dysregulation because nobody teaches us what to do about trauma and nobody teaches us what to do about dysregulation in our nervous system when we're kids. And so the only option is to be perpetually dysregulated. Isn't it smart that you learn to do this? It's so smart. What we have to do is build a relationship with that protective part. We have to learn to love them. We have to acknowledge them. We have to understand them. And then, and most importantly, we have to come to the aid of that vulnerable part in the way that no one did. Because see, the protector isn't actually bringing resolution to the vulnerable part. As I mentioned earlier, they're just covering up the dysregulation. And because they don't have the ability to actually give that vulnerable part what they need, nor does your wife or your partner or your husband or your parent or your friend or your career. Nobody can rescue the vulnerable part except for you. I sure can't. No mental health professional can. If anyone makes you feel like they're the answer, the messiah for you, please don't work with them. That is unequivocally untrue. You are the answer. You are the light at the end of the tunnel. You are the only person that can ever know your vulnerable parts the way that you do. And we also need support in that process, therapeutic support, through a clinician practitioner, through community, through a friend, through a loved one. We need support in this process, but you are the only person that can understand that vulnerable part. So what we have to do is turn towards them. And the more that we do this and we are able to comfort that part, when I say comfort, what we're really doing is we're helping them to discharge that energy in their bodies, in our body, that never got resolution. The more that we do that, the dysregulation resolves and that unresolved trauma resolves. And the result of that is the protector no longer needs to protect. I can tell you, I was going to give an example from professionally, but first I'll give you my own life. In doing this work, I had very severe OCD when I was young. I used to check locks at night. And that meant that I had to take a certain number of steps to get to a door or a window when I checked the lock. And if I didn't, I thought that I was going to die. What was I really doing? That was a coping strategy to give me a sense of control when my home was so out of control. It's a really smart thing to focus on that and take my attention off of the terror I felt inside. That's a coping strategy. And there was no way I could stop. I would stay up for hours every single night doing that. I used, as I told you, exercise to cope, so much so that I went on a run before a very intensive hip surgery. I remember I got to the hospital and the doctor after the surgery was like, there's so much inflammation in your hip. What happened? And I said, well, I went for a run this morning. And he just couldn't believe that I actually did that because the pain was so severe. That's to the degree that we'll use these coping strategies. I told you I did it with food. I was a prisoner to these coping strategies. I did it with alcohol. I don't use any of those things to cope anymore. Any of them. I can experience them from a place of regulation. I eat to nourish myself, but I also eat because I like the taste of food I'm eating. I'm not eating just because I have to be rigid, which I used to do. I like fueling my body in healthy ways, and then I like, treating myself too. I love exercise. I probably exercise about 5 days a week, but I completely listen to my body. So instead of, if I've only had 6 hours of sleep, I am not going to do an intensive workout, but I'm still going to move because I love it. And the same goes, and by the way, I'm about to name drinking. You can certainly remove these things from your experience. And for many of us, that's a necessary thing to do. But for me, I went from using alcohol to numb and, had no control because I wasn't in the driver's seat to saying, I think I want to enjoy a glass of wine tonight with my partner or with a friend. And I don't need to have more than a glass of wine or two, maybe at the most, because I'm really present to the experience that I'm having. I'm not using it to numb. The same goes with watching television. I love a great TV show, so I really value the art of film and TV. I love it. But now I do it from a place of full connectivity to whatever I'm watching instead of numbing. And so that's what I mean. I'm giving you these personal examples because as I've used so many coping strategies, it is possible to not be a prisoner to them, but you can't battle them. You have to do parts work as I named, and then we're going to talk quickly about a second thing that we must do. I've worked with so many people who have struggled with coping strategies, and through this work, people have been able to resolve it. And we no longer have to be a prisoner to these experiences because we are actually addressing the underlying problem or what's going on. So the next thing that we have to do is begin replacing coping strategies with regulating resources. Now, regulating resources are anything that support me to move dysregulation through my body. You cannot talk yourself out of being dysregulated because dysregulation happens subcortically, meaning it's experienced in our bodies. So all I want you to do is create a list of anything that registers as good, pleasant, or regulating for you. And that might be things like going for a walk, listening to music, taking a bath, going to the gym, having dinner with a friend, engaging in a hobby that you love or art. You get the idea. Anything that helps me to feel more present here and good, that's a regulating resource. And I've got lots of programs that provide somatic therapeutic regulating resources. We'll link out in the show notes some programs I have that you can get on the wait list for that really focuses on that. But for now, create a list of anything that is regulating for you. And all I want you to do is really get clear for yourself around when are there predictable times that I use coping strategies? We usually have predictable times. That is a clue that that's a time or a sort of experience that triggers a vulnerable part. And then as we know, the protector comes in. So when do I typically use them? Now, as you see yourself going to use a coping strategy, the work is to pause and say, can I do a regulating resource first? Now, you might not be able to catch it right away. You might have already engaged in the coping strategy. That doesn't matter. Whenever you catch it, pause and use a regulating resource. I might go for a walk instead of having that second glass of wine or even that first glass of wine. Go for a walk and then let yourself know, and I can have that when I come back. What you'll notice is that you're going to be discharging the dysregulation from your body. So what will occur is the impulse or incessant need for that coping strategy will lessen, let's say, 10%. So I still engage in it, but it didn't overtake me quite as much. The more that you do this, you lessen this dysregulation more and more and more until I remember the day where I went in the kitchen, because it's a habituated pattern to use these coping strategies, to eat something after dinner at night. And I had regulated first and greeted my parts. And I was like, I had like 3 chips. And I was like, I don't actually want this. I don't need it. I was able to stop eating. I was totally in the driver's seat. So when you do this work in this way, it actually resolves the reason you're using coping strategies in the first place. It helps us build new neural networks for positive choices in our lives, meaning reflexes. So instead of going to that numbing thing, I go to the regulating thing. And it allows us to be in the driver's seat of our lives.
Not sure where to start with somatic healing? My free quiz, What's Keeping You Stuck, will equip you with a personalized guide and tangible trauma-informed tools to help you regulate your nervous system. Check out the link in the show notes to get started.
So we're going to get to the Q&A portion of this episode. Today we have Rachel here with us. If you're new to the podcast, Rachel is a trained social worker. She is a member of my team, someone who I love dearly, and she supports every single community that we have inside of all the programs we offer, and she even runs some of those calls too. So Rachel, thank you for being here with us today. I'm excited to get into the questions that we have. How are they?
They're really potent questions. And I know from working in your DMs on Instagram, we get asked this quite a lot. And I haven't seen this addressed on the podcast before. So I'm really excited for people to dive deeper into how addiction is a viewed through a polyvagal lens. This first question relates to smoking. So I have quit smoking and other bad habits and started working out and taking better care of myself. I thought I would feel better about myself, but I feel worse, very depressed and shut down. I'm really struggling. Why is this?
This is such an important question and really goes into everything that I talked about in the teaching component of this episode. So I just want to highlight some of these things and why this is occurring. It is totally normal, and it doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. Now remember, a coping strategy's job is to cover up dysregulation that's living inside of us. That dysregulation that's living inside of us might not be dysregulation from yesterday, although it could be. It could be dysregulation from 20 years ago or 30 years ago, or often, by the way, whenever you begin using smoking as a coping strategy. So whatever dysregulation was there that was overwhelming for my system, I learned that I can use smoking as a way to cover that up. Smoking becomes a companion. It becomes a comfort blanket. It becomes my soothing partner. The really, in many ways, it's the person that was never there for me or could not be there for me. I found it via smoking. And so, what was the term which they used? A negative term they used to describe it. Bad habits.
Quit smoking and other bad habits. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just want us to see if we can reorient this idea of bad habits. And I understand why that term is used, but the truth of the matter is I needed to find something when I was in that incredible experience of isolation or feeling so utterly alone or being unseen. When I begin lifting that cover of coping, which is the smoking, I'm going to be with what was always there. That, again, may be very old. It might not be from today. As I talked about in the episode, you can't just lift the coping strategy and expect that everything will be fine. We have to then address what's underneath it. And the goal in the work is to do this in a titrated, gentle way. That means a little bit at a time. And the other thing that's really important to name is that part of you that felt that deep level of sorrow, depression, hopelessness is likely a younger version of you. I don't know how old that version is, but likely younger. And what they need is a safe, competent protector. Somebody who is a human version of being the resource that smoking was. Meaning they are steady, they are present, they are there when you need them. They show up, they say, "Oh, my love, I've got you." And that's the job of our adult selves. And so the work is, can I identify who that part of me is that is experiencing that affect, that depression, that shutdown, which is your dorsal vagal complex? Who are they? Can I access adult me? And can I come to their aid in the way that I just described? So I access adult me and I go towards that part and take their hand and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry that you've experienced this. Let me be with you in it. I'm not here to change you. I'm not here to morph you. I'm not here to control you or tell you what to do. I'm simply here to hold space for your experience." And we do this a little bit at a time. And the more we do that, the more that younger part of us gets the resolution they never got. And then that dysregulation or that affect goes away and you are successfully healing the past in the present. So I'm really glad that they asked this, because we can tend to think like, and then when I stop doing this coping thing, everything's going to be great. Well, it is forward movement and it is great, but it may not feel great because now I'm actually addressing the wound underneath.
Yeah. And thank you for addressing that, because you would assume, oh, I should be feeling better. I'm doing these things to take care of myself. And without knowing that there's a store there that's waiting for you to hold it and be with it. Yeah, it can just feel like you're putting in a lot of effort to quit something and not getting the return or the reward or the joy that you thought you were going to get.
Yeah.
So.
And forward doesn't always look like forward in healing. It's like, what? This is forward? Now I have to deal with this loneliness or this pain? Yeah, that is forward. It absolutely is, which is why this work isn't for the faint of heart. And on the other side of processing that is the most extraordinary freedom.
And how you describe smoking when you began to answer that question before, is how food is for me, or, played that role. It's like always been there for me, my bestest friend, there for sorrow, there for joy, there for, everything. And I know from being in the communities this week, lots of people can have shame around what their coping mechanisms are and feel like, oh, I shouldn't be doing it, and find an intensity around that of not being able to stop. But when we've never had any other tools showing how to handle a strong emotion, how to be with ourselves, it makes sense that at least we had something. We created and changed and had something. So,
and thank goodness we had those things. That's the reorientation towards it. And when we can do that, things move forward a lot faster.
Yeah. Oh, well, this is a sweet question. Can you help me better understand addiction through a polyvagal perspective? I know the addiction is just a symptom of trauma and dysregulation, but the addiction seems to be creating more dysregulation. How do I focus on regulation when I'm engaging in addictive behaviors that further dysregulate me, especially when I can't stop?
Well, I think the first thing and most important thing is what I've said already, so not to be redundant, but it is very important, is we have to reorient to how we see the protective parts of us that are using the coping strategy. That's a part of us. Earlier in this episode, I said, do you ever feel like, I started the episode with this because this is what I felt. I was like, did you ever feel like all of a sudden someone is taking over your body and you're doing this thing and you're like watching yourself do it outside of yourself and you're like, what am I doing? Why am I in the kitchen eating an entire jar of peanut butter right now? I do not want to do this, but I can't stop doing it. And then and I'm going to say something that I had so much shame around because I know there are people listening who've done this. And then you throw it in the trash and you're like, I'm not going to eat this. And then you go in the trash and you take it out of the trash and you find yourself eating it. I can't tell you how many times I did that. And I'm sharing these things that I've done because it's so easy. We go online and you're like, that person has everything, they've just, it's either been easy or they're not like me or they've it all figured out. First of all, no one has it all figured out. A lot of times I was saying this, I don't know who I was talking to. I think our creative director, but I was talking about ideas that I get. And I was like, the ideas all come from my own, oftentimes they either come from working with clients, so clinical work, or they come from my own experience. And some people say like, how did she know that? Because I know it personally. And so this is something I know personally. And to me, shame feeds on silence. The best thing that I can do to be of service, one of the things I can do is to proclaim out loud the things that we have felt shame about and say, do not worry, there's nothing to be ashamed of. So that's one coping strategy. People do that with sex. You're like, oh my gosh, I didn't want to do this thing, but I did. And I keep finding myself in these experiences and I feel so much shame about it. Or we do it with alcohol or drugs and we beat ourselves up. Please just know that this is a protective part of you that is taking the steering wheel and saying effectively, I refuse to let the vulnerable part feel that pain again. No, I do not want them to feel that. So I will go to the ends of the earth, including adding additional dysregulation, which is what this person's talking about. So Rachel, you and I know this thing about binging food. You wake up feeling super shitty because I'm inflamed. I don't sleep well because I'm eating right before bed. And that means that I'm not getting great sleep. I'm having inflammation in my body. And I wake up feeling crappy and more dysregulated. So that's just one example. Or if, let's say, it's drinking. I wake up hungover because I was drinking by myself, because I was numbing the pain of loneliness that I didn't know what to do with, because there's an 8-year-old inside of me who's still feeling the pain of the neglect they experienced and they don't have any other tools and I don't want them to spend the whole night feeling that, so we'll just numb it. And then you wake up and your cortisol is higher and your adrenaline is higher. And that's the residual effects of having these coping strategies that we use. So just know how normal this is. And as I talked about in this episode, and I just like to proclaim proudly with excitement that this work is not glamorous. And I love that. I really like and by the way, I think it's primal in our species. If I think about when we were self-sustained, like I'm out chopping the wood and I'm chopping it up, and then I'm exhausted at the end of the day because I chopped this wood up and now I have a fire because I did this. Wow, that feels really good. I did this work and now I have a result. That's positive. The healing journey is like that too. But somewhere along the way, I don't know how this happened in our culture, that we want all these quick fixes and we want it to seem like it's like just no effort. You do this one thing and then all of a sudden life is just amazing. It doesn't work that way. And I like that it doesn't, because doing this for a very long time and knowing the process of you cut the tree and you chop the wood and you rest and then you laugh with friends and you come back and you cut the wood up into more pieces and then you rest again and you avoid it for a day and then you go back and do it again and then you have a fire. It feels so good. It builds a sense of internal strength. Like, look how strong, look what I can do. I did this. And so the way through this work is exactly the same. That I want to go have that cigarette. And you know what I'm first going to do? I'm going to play a song that makes me feel loved. And I'm just going to hold the part of me that was never loved. I love you. You are loved. You belong to me. You belong to me. And then when that part feels 15% better after the song ends, I say, and now I can go have that cigarette so I can feel 75% better today. But look what I did. I just made that part feel 15% better. Do not shame yourself for using the cigarette after. You have a strong neural network for this. Don't expect. This is what I mean by it's not glamorous. It takes consistency. You do it again. You do it again. I will never forget the day. All that I had left was no longer the dysregulated part, but the habituated pattern. Meaning of like binge eating, let's say. So I found myself in the kitchen about to binge eat because I was so used to the habituation of it. And then it would be like, I don't know, I had some leftovers or I had a few chips. And then I was like, I don't actually need this. And then I went and sat down and continued watching the TV show. And I was like, I'm not a prisoner anymore. And so this is what happens when you do it again and again and again and again. And there's a real beauty in the experience that happens when you can say, I did this. I'm the one that did this. And I know exactly how I did it. And here's the coolest part. This becomes your blueprint on how to live an expanded life. That's the coolest. I said that I have started using this term like, I know the rodeo. What I mean by the rodeo is I know exactly how to expand my life because I've done it hundreds and hundreds of times. That means I know how to go into what scares me, the dysregulation, but it doesn't overwhelm me anymore because I know exactly what to do for it not to be overwhelming. I go into that dark place and I know when I go into that, I am going to pop out the other side into an even more bright, colorful life. And if you keep doing that again and again and again, you start to become very confident in this process of not just healing, but the fullness of self-expression that you can be. But it always requires, I'm going into this thing that scares me. And the more data you have that like, I can cut the tree down and then I rest and then I chop it up and then I rest and then I light a fire and oh my gosh, I had a fire. And then I do it again and again and again. It really leads to feeling empowered in our life, which is the exact opposite of trauma.
Yeah. And how great, like that you normalize it, don't shame it, use it to empower you, and that it's going to be scary and that you become stronger through that, because so often it looks like there is a magic wand that you can wave or that one thing and it's going to be easy and other people make it look easy. And to actually, for you to acknowledge, Sarah, that it's hard, scary, but you can do it and the process. Yeah, that is powerful.
There's just one other thing I want to name for anyone who's in a partnership or you have a kid or anyone close to you. When someone you love, let's say it's around coping strategies or addiction, but really, honestly, around anything that they're stepping into, what we can do is we expect them, like, now that you understand this and now you know what to do, get it perfectly right. And then what do? And then we become disappointed, hopeless. This relationship will never work because you got it wrong again. That, if you're doing that, and I'm saying this as someone, point the finger at myself first, who has done this very often, you are throwing gasoline onto the fire. You are making it worse, not better. And you are having an expectation on your partner of perfection that is very unfair I'm being a little hard on all of us, but don't worry, I'm being hard on me too. That is unfair. Because how could I ever expect that of someone else if I cannot expect that of myself? It's not possible. Do you know what the best thing you can do in a partnership is if your partner is, I call this stretching, if they are leaning into their hard and they get it, just like we're talking about coping strategies, they get it 90% wrong and 10% right. Wow. Look at what they're doing for you and for them. And you know what I want everyone here to think about? Think about like, is your partner stretching for you? They're getting it 90% wrong and 10% right. Because to me, truly, that the older I get, the more I don't know is the truth. And that's how I think it should be. But the older I get, the more I understand what love is. And the highest form of love is not the things that are easy for your partner to do. The highest form of love is them saying, I will step into this thing because you need me to. And you needing me too is actually an invitation into my own healing. So thank you for being the most terrifying invitation I have ever had. That's love to me. Thank you for being the most terrifying invitation I have ever had in my life. And thank you and we say to them, and thank you for taking the most terrifying invitation and getting it 90% wrong and 10% right, because I know how hard it is to get it 10% right. I know the shame that comes up when I sort of do this correctly, but by the way, usually in partnership, you are much better at the thing you need your partner to do than they are. So like imagine you're a professional basketball player and you need your partner to get on the basketball court. They've never played. They're not good at basketball. They're not athletic at all. And they're getting on the court. Could you imagine if they got on the court and you said, that's not how you do it. You actually did that wrong. Actually, I don't know who taught you how to do it that way, but you're never going to be good at playing basketball. This relationship isn't going to work because you can't play basketball. I'm critiquing every single thing you do. Do you think they'd want to play basketball with you? Never. They would say, they would freeze up. And they would say, like, I can't even dribble because I'm just going to get it wrong. But instead, if you said they got it 90% wrong and you watched them be scared and they were brave and they got it 10% right, and then they looked at you like afraid, like, oh no, I got it wrong. And you said, wow, that's what love is. That's what love is. So if you have a partner who's doing that for you around their addiction, or doing it for you around their coping strategy, and maybe it's they work all the time and you complain like, you never put me first, I'm not important, the family's not important. How about we look at who is their protector protecting? Who is the vulnerable part that's afraid to feel that pain again? And if they step towards it and they're on their computer at 7:30 and then they're like, shoot, sorry, and they close it and they sit on the couch with you all night, watching a show with you, and you're connecting and you're talking, but they do look at their email once. Wow, what a big step. How about we talk about the fact that they spent 2.5 of those hours being present with you instead of why'd you look at your phone? And if we want health for ourselves, that's how we have to approach it for us. If we want health, and I don't know how we just went down the whole road of relationship, but this is really, really important. And if we can orient that way relationally, oh my gosh, so much change happens. Look at how much others are trying to love you. Look how much by their stretching, and your kids too, and your closest friends too, and you for yourself.
Yeah. Because we do stretch when we try to bring in these tools as well as our coping mechanisms. Like, it is a stretch. And so, yeah, thank you so much for naming that and sharing that. Our next question is around addiction, around coffee and caffeine use. So we have an audio question for this one. Someone sent this in.
Hi, Sarah. First, I want to say thank you. Your work has really held my hand for many years now. I'm kind of going to free throw this question. My relationship with coffee is sort of so long-standing and early established in my life. I grew up in like a moderate hoarder household. I found it was my main ally when I was trying to navigate that experience. And now that I'm living for first time on my own, I still find that coffee both relaxes me and uplifts me. And I guess my question is this okay when I feel like I just can drink it all day?
this is such a great question. And I think coffee is a companion for so many of us, by the way, including myself. I love coffee. I have a cup of coffee below me right now. And can be so comforting and can be used as a regulating resource as well, by the way, meaning something that supports us to feel really good and experience more regulation in our nervous system. So what our nervous system does is it looks for cues of danger or safety at every single moment of our lives. And for many of us, if we had homes, childhood homes, that were not places that were wonderful and yummy and safe and amazing and all the good things that we want, then neuroception is going to see our adult home as a reflection of that childhood home, even though it's entirely different, even though we're living in a different place. You may notice that you go to a friend's house and you're like, wow, that house is so awesome. I love being at my friend's house. I feel good and wonderful. Why? Because the threat detector in neuroception says someone else's house is great. Just like in childhood, my friend's house was awesome. I love their parents. Their home was in order. It wasn't a place where hoarding occurred. By the way, what is hoarding? Hoarding is a coping strategy. It is covering up the dysregulation and the overwhelm and lack of safety inside of that person or this person's parents. And so it is about the hoarding, but it's really about why is the hoarding happening? Likely lacked connection and attunement and safety because they're caregivers were not in regulation themselves. And so again, other people's houses, cue of safety. My own house reminds me of my childhood. So what happens is the protector that we learned to use coffee as a companion when you were younger has a reflex. Anytime it's in your home, let's say, it says, now's the time to use a coping strategy because being in a home means you're not going to be attuned with, I feel this like sorrow when I'm in my home or I feel panic when I'm in my home. All of that is because the past is being superimposed on the present. So one thing that I like to do is I like to take the hand of our nervous system and we have to show it, not tell it, that this home is different. A way to do that is by orienting. So how can I literally orient and be present to sounds, sensations, feelings, smells of this place that is different than the past? It's almost like if you had a scared little kid that was like, this is just like where I grew up and my job is not to intellectualize them and tell them why it's not or to tell them get over it, but it's to say, hey, my love, let me show you how it's different. Do you see that palm tree outside? There are no palm trees where you grew up. Can you see that there's this, I was going to say fluffy dog. Truman's not fluffy at all. It's a chicken nugget. There's a dog here. We didn't have dogs when we were little. Do you notice the colors are different? And then I also like to bring in the things that I never had in my childhood home into my adult home. That's the job of adult us. So if there wasn't a lot of music playing in your house, it might be playing music in the house or dancing around the house or more laughter in the house. How can I bring in what I didn't experience? This begins to show, not tell, those parts that this is a very different experience. And then what I want you to notice is, am I going to coffee to regulate or am I going to coffee to numb? If you're going to coffee to regulate, there's an act of presence involved in it. And if you're going to numb, it's a lack of presence. So what I really want you to do is if you're going to numb, my job is to first connect into who is the part that is feeling dysregulated and what do they need from me? And can I come into regulation? Then engage in having a cup of coffee from total presence. Meaning, I want you to use all your senses as you experience the coffee. And that embodiment will tell you when you've had enough coffee. If you're drinking coffee all throughout the day, that means it's a coping strategy. We want to connect into that. Smell the coffee. Hold it in your hand. Really ask yourself before you take a next sip, have I had enough caffeine or not? Ask your nervous system. You'll know. It'll tell you. And the other thing I just want to quickly name, if you experience high sympathetic in your nervous system, anxiety, worry, frustration, fear, terror, rage, racing thoughts, butterflies in your stomach, always on the go, caffeine is something we want to minimize because it just fuels the fire of that sort of dysregulation. So those are the things I'd want this person to focus on. And the more we do it, coffee then becomes a companion rather than a way to numb.
I like that, using it as your orienting tool to be able to come into even more presence, even more connection with your body and your nervous system. And how to turn a coping mechanism into a regulating resource as well. But how to do that.
That's right.
Yeah, wonderful.
That's right. And that's a really beautiful thing when we can alchemize it. Like I can take food and turn it into not something that I'm a prisoner of, but something I have a relationship with. And it's a beautiful thing that this work brings. So thank you for being here with us today, Rachel. It's so good to have you. And thank you for all the ways that you embody this work and then you share it with all of our listeners too.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here. And yeah, just to hear your responses to these questions, Sarah. They help so much. I hear so many people's questions and queries, and caffeine and coffee has definitely been a big one. So yeah, I know loads of people will be supported. Thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoying this episode and want to go even deeper into somatic healing? You can join my email community for weekly teachings, tools, and live events. Click the show notes to join.